Alright, let's see. That's working, that's working, that's working, that's turned off, that's set to silent. Are we ready to go? I think we're ready to go. I see already the JP is in the chat and says soon. That's trademarked. Not by me, I have to pay to use the word soon, but, you know, cost of doing business and everything. Are we ready? Yeah, I think we're ready. Alright. Then let's get rid of that. There it goes, and we'll get started. So, hello, Shadowcat back, and today, well, I've been following the news over the week, and something this week happened that we're going to get to later. But it really struck a chord with me because I'm a chess player. And I've stated this before, I'm a person who likes to look ahead. I try to look to the future. I don't necessarily care what the next move is. I care more about what is going to be the move and the result 10 moves down the line. If white moves this piece, black moves in response, and then in response, in response. Now, there's two sides of this coin. Number one, if you try to look to the future and you try to anticipate the long-term goals of somebody's actions, you can be better prepared, or sometimes you can completely avoid the consequences of those actions. On the flip side of that, though, because you are trying to look so far ahead, it does make it very difficult to actually ascertain what's going to happen sometimes. This is why everybody hates the weatherman. Because if you've never studied meteorology, then you don't quite comprehend exactly what it is they're trying to do, and why what meteorologists try to do is so very, very hard. And I can't think of a really good model off the top of my head, but just picture if I had like a bag of marbles and a bowl. If I take one marble and just throw it in the bowl, can you guess where that marble is going to go? Probably. It's going to roll up one side, it'll roll down, it'll roll up the other side, and it'll roll back and forth, probably in circle, well, not in circles, but it could go in circles, but it'll probably just roll back and forth until it eventually comes to rest in the middle. Okay? Not too difficult. Throw in two marbles, and they're going to do the same thing. They might bump into each other, though, and that might send them off in different paths. So, you can still kind of predict where they're going to go, just it's a little bit harder now. But what if you took an entire handful of marbles and threw them into a bowl? Where are they going to go? Who knows? It's too hard to keep track of them even, much less try to predict where they're going to go. So it is true with meteorology, where is it that hard to predict what's going to happen tomorrow? No. Most weather forecasts within 24 hours are usually pretty good. 48 hours out? Less good. 72 hours out? Really bad. And anything longer than that is basically just wanton speculation. They do their best, but weather patterns are way too complex to accurately predict. So too as it is when it comes to just about any kind of system. This is why corporate analysts make so much money, especially if they're really, really good at what they do. Part of that is going to be education, training, and experience. Part of that will just be instinct, which is what separates the good ones from the bad ones. Because it does take a certain degree of instinct to be able to guess what the markets are going to do. And for my part, I don't know anything about economic markets, but I do know a fair amount about people. Not necessarily individual people, I'm actually a terrible people person on an individual basis. But when it comes to populations of people, It's not hard to look at an entire population of people, an entire culture, and guess where that culture is going to go, because cultures tend to move in very uniform ways. They follow traditions, they follow social norms, and they will behave in largely predictable fashions. There's a reason why the phrase "history often repeats itself" has become part of our common parlance. Because it does. People today have not changed that fundamentally from people 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago. As much as we like to pretend that we are the enlightened ape, we are still apes. We are still animals, and we are still subject to all the same rules and everything that every other animal on the planet is subject to. That is to say, we all still have the same driving factors. I find it kind of funny when people ask, what is the meaning of life? It's been one of those age-old philosophical questions. What is the meaning of life? And it's really a simple question to answer. What is the meaning of life? It's life. The meaning of life is expressed by every single living thing in existence. The purpose of life is to continue. And this is expressed by the very simplest of organisms. They are born, they grow, they mate, they reproduce, and then they die. But after mating and reproducing, there are more of them to carry on. Single-celled amoeba do this. Simple sponges do this. Fish do this. Insects do this. Rodents do this. I mean, we are no different. The purpose is to just continue. And so we do as we have done forever. So it's not that hard to really look ahead and think about, where are we going? What are we doing? And the unfortunate part of that is that not only do we know where we are and where we're going, but for the supposedly enlightened apes, we continue to do very, very unenlightened things. Which is where I want to talk today. Now, today, of course, is like every single other day of the last year, the last 2 years, let's be honest, the last like 7 years. Trump is in the news. Of course he is. And I really get tired of talking about Trump. I really do. The problem is that Trump, as I like to express in many of my other analogies, Trump is not a problem. Trump is a symptom. Trump is a cough. Okay? Trump is an ache or a pain. Trump is a rash. He is the result of a problem, not the cause of it. And this can be described in a variety of ways. If we want to talk about his rise to power and his popular support, his existence is because of the disenfranchisement and the distrust that is inherent in the population after years and decades of government malfeasance and government corruption. And people said, we want something different, and so Trump happened. Or if you're unhappy with that, we can say that Trump is the result of government corruption, of money in politics, where only the rich and the influential have even been able to have a seat at the political table. In which case, Trump, being a billionaire, was a natural choice for it because he's one of the only few people who could even manage to run for the presidency. But either way, his being there is a result of a system that has changed and the people who have built that system in the first place. Trump isn't the problem. he's the result of the problem. Now, this is not to say that he cannot be a problem for other things. As I have stated before in my previous analogies, I love to use diabetes. Diabetes is a problem. Diabetes can lead to a variety of other things, such as poor circulation, which can lead to things like gangrene. It can lead to renal failure. It can lead to... what else? I'm blanking on this, but diabetes can lead to a whole host of other problems given that it's an endocrine disorder. However, while diabetes is a problem, it's also a symptom. Why? Well, if it's type 1 diabetes, I'm sorry, but it is a symptom of a genetic problem, okay? You got dealt a bad hand in life. So you have whatever mixed up, messed up genetics that says your body just cannot produce insulin. I'm sorry, you got dealt pocket twos. It sucks. Otherwise, though, the result of type 2 diabetes is, generally speaking, either, well, actually, I can say poor lifestyle in general. It's either a lack of activity, it's overeating, it's bad diet, it's a great number of things. All of these things on their own are problems, not necessarily symptoms, although there are people who would disagree with that. But they will lead to diabetes, which can then lead to other things. So when we look at somebody like Trump, we can say he is absolutely a symptom of a greater problem. Now, is he a problem on his own? That is debatable. And it really depends on which side of the aisle you fall down on. However, what I want to talk about today is the response to Trump. Because if Trump is a symptom, then what's happening after him is also a symptom of this whole thing falling apart. In previous lectures, I discussed the various lawsuits against him. And I said that we are entering into unprecedented territory in the United States. We have the court case in New York, where Trump is being railroaded and denied many of his rights because they say that he's not being allowed to present evidence, he's not being allowed to enter documents, he's just not being allowed to do a lot of things, on top of the fact that they're indicting a former president to begin with, and they're doing so on rather shaky charges. That, however, has paled in comparison to the case down in Georgia, where not only are they indicting him for something he didn't actually do, that being the election interference case, but they're not only going after him, but they're going after everybody adjacent to him. They're going after all of his attorneys. They're going after the alternate slate of electors. They're going after anybody who was even close to him. And then, this week, there was another case that came out where in New York, they are summarily dissolving his businesses. And we'll get to this more later on. But just as a quick little summary, going through all of his paperwork, which has already been gone over 7 times before, but they continue to do so looking for anything they can use, Trump has been found guilty of fraud. Specifically, he has been found guilty of overvaluing his business assets. Now, this on its own is really nothing. No one cares about this. I mean, most businesses are going to overvalue themselves in general. But the way they went about doing it and the actions they took during it are what I want to talk about today. Because the first thing they did is they went to his home property of Mar-a-Lago, and they said that Mar-a-Lago was only worth, I think they said $18 million. It is prime real estate in Florida, which literally stretches from like coast to coast in a very exclusive part of the state. I don't know exactly where, I don't care where. All I know is that it's a very expensive piece of land. And that is just the land itself. Then, of course, there is the property built on top of it, and the fact that he runs it as a business, which I believe I heard turns a profit of about $25 million a year. The business profits alone would make the property worth more than they're saying it's worth, which makes this a rather obvious lie. It's a little bit like a child who has been told to clean up their room, lying about saying their room is clean, when it's very obvious that all the toys have simply been piled under a rug in the middle of the room. It's not enough that they lied about it. They lie about everything. But it's that the lie was so naked and brutally obvious, and that the judgment on it was summary. Now, for those who don't do a lot of legal work, summary judgment basically means that the evidence presented has been so overwhelming that there is no need for a trial. There is no need to impanel a jury. There is no need for argument because the evidence simply speaks for itself. It needs no further clarification. It needs no further argument, and thus judgment can be passed without need of any further process. Which means that the judge was given the paperwork that showed that he had overvalued his real estate properties by so much, and the judge then decided that, yes, in this case, his business has committed fraud. There is no further need for argument, and so judgment will be passed. And the judgment in this case is the dissolution of the Trump Incorporated business, whatever that is. I don't know, nor neither do I care. It's really immaterial to the argument I'm making. But the business is to be dissolved, the business licenses are to be revoked, and by extension, all assets held by the business are to be seized. This, I do believe, means Trump Tower. I do believe it means Mar-a-Lago and any other properties that would be owned by Trump, at least tied to this business. Which means that if we boil this all down to a quick, like, 2-line summary, the government has come through and passed a summary judgment against Trump, dissolving all of his businesses and seizing all of his assets without need for any kind of charge, nor trial, nor argument, nor representation, completely removing his right to due process, his right to face his accusers, and his right to argue his case. Now, we've already gone back in previous lectures and explained in excruciating detail, as I tend to do, how the government has gone through and violated pretty much every single one of the first 10 rights enshrined in the Bill of Rights. This is just another example where they have further removed your right to due process. The Fifth Amendment has essentially been completely erased at this point. Not one part of it, not a subheader, not one of the individual rights enshrined therein. The entire right itself is no longer in play. Because as many people are quick to mention, they can remove it from Trump, the former president and one of the wealthiest people on the planet. What exactly is protecting you? The answer to that, of course, is nothing. You have never really had that much protection to begin with, but now it's becoming plainly obvious that the only reason they haven't come for you yet is just because they haven't needed to. But don't worry. Someday, eventually, your name will come up, and somebody will come for you. And as they're showing now, when they do come for you, it will not be to arrest you and take you to court. It will be because they are going to show up at your doorstep, say that you have been accused, you have been discussed at this point because there was no trial, you have been found guilty of whatever crime it is they say you've committed, you have been sentenced, and they are now here to carry out your sentence. What was your crime? You don't know. Who accused you? You don't know. All you do know is that they're here for you now, and you have to go with them. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because, as I stated before in the beginning, history often repeats. Or as people like to say, it doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And so, I want to talk about a little bit of history. Specifically, I want to go back to Germany, pre-World War II. And I want to talk about the various things that happened in Germany before World War II. The things that led up to it. All the things that were happening in Germany before the invasion of Poland, before they declared war on the entire world. And I want to show you how Germany became what it was. And so before I do that, let's first look at the chat. I see that I have 2 people in here, which is 2 more people than I was expecting. Hello, JP. Hello, Tux. Good morning to both of you. JP says 42. The answer, of course, is not 42. I just told you, the meaning of life is actually life. However, that book was really good, so I will accept that as a suitable secondary answer. All right. So, let's go ahead and get into this. Let me make sure that all of my browser windows are set up properly. It does look like it, yes. And that one looks good. Okay, that looks good there. Yeah, this should have been better organized, but it's been kind of a rough morning. I just finished my breakfast before I started this thing. So those look good. Those look good. Where's my list? Oh, there's my list. Now the real question is, can I read it? The text is too small. Okay. We're ready to go now. So I want to start talking about Germany. And we're going to be going way, way back. And this is the right one, right? Yes, it is. So I wanted to look back at all of the different laws they passed in pre-war Germany that kind of led up to what they became. Because when we think of Nazi Germany, we think of the World War II Nazi Germany, that being the Germany that was rolling tanks into Poland and France, the Germany that was launching V-2 rockets into London, the Germany that had multiple concentration camps and then later death camps. I mean, the Germany that actually tried to march on Moscow in the middle of the winter. Not their brightest move. You would have thought they would have learned that from the French, but either way. Before they were doing all of that, there was like a 10-year period where, people lived in Germany. And not just Germans. There were lots of people who lived in Germany, including Jews, including blacks, including gays, including pretty much everybody. They all lived there. But then something happened. The Nazis happened. Which, by the way, I should point out now that if you're actually here for this lecture and you're not currently subscribed, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon if you think this is something you want to listen to. More importantly, though, share this video out, because I'm going to be saying the word Nazi a lot, and YouTube really, really hates that word. Which means that this lecture is going to be so far buried that the only people I'm going to be preaching to afterwards are going to be the lava people down in the core of the earth. So if you want this to get seen by anybody who's not made out of magma, share this video out and leave a like and a comment on it. Otherwise, it's going to be there when some kind of alien civilization shows up and they start excavating all the way down to the mantle. Alright. So, when we talk about what was happening in Germany before World War II, I want to talk about two groups in particular, that being the Jews and the communists. And a lot of people right now just went, wait, the communists? What are you talking about? I never heard about that. Ah, there's reasons why you've never heard about that, actually. The first reason, of course, is that, well, you're probably in the US and we hate communists. For good reason, but it does kind of skew our perspective of history. And I am not a historian, and even I will recognize that my view of history is slanted. And I am by far not a historian, so I'm doing my best here. I have multiple examples from multiple different sources trying to be as even-handed as I can about all this. But if I get things wrong, it's because I'm not a historian. And you can correct me in the chat. But I want to talk about the Jews, and then I want to talk about the communists, and you'll find out why when we get there. But when it came to the Jews, obviously we know that the Nazis hated Jews, okay? But the path that they took to actually exterminating the Jews took a really, really long time. Specifically, it started actually way back in 1933. But in 1933, with the passage of the, the Reich, what was it called? Right, it started with the Reichstag Fire Decree. And that laid the foundation for a lot of things to happen. We're going to get to the Reichstag Fire Decree later on, but it was the Reichstag Fire Decree that basically opened the door for everything. Because once that was in place, then they could go after people like the Jews, and the communists, and basically anybody they didn't like. And Tuck says, so what you're saying is that censorship against people who spread bad ideas also results in those ideas being harder to identify? How convenient. Oh, Tux. Oh, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. So, 1933 was the Reichstag Fire Decree. This, of course, happened after the Reichstag Fire, which was the literal spark that kicked off everything. But after that happened, they decided that this was a great time to go after Jews, which they did. And this is how. So the first thing to happen really was the Reichstag citizenship law in 1935. Now, what this did was actually very simple. The Reichstag citizenship law says, any subject of the state who belongs to the protective union of the German Reich, who therefore has specific obligations to the Reich, let's see, status subject to be acquired in accordance with provisions, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Article 2 is really where I want to go to, though. There is an Article 3, but I don't really care. Article 2. A citizen of the Reich may only be one who is of German or kindred blood, and who through his behavior shows that he is both desirous and personally fit to serve loyally the German people and the Reich. Number 2, the right of citizenship to be obtained by, is to grant the Reich citizenship papers. And number 3, only a citizen of the Reich may enjoy full political rights in consonance with the provisions of the laws. Now, that is a bunch of legalese that can be boiled down very simply. Only Germans can be citizens. Now, this is important because Germany was a rather diverse country. Now, it was, of course, majority German, as any country should be if a country should have a majority of its own people. But it did have a large population of other races, of other nationalities, other cultures, including Jews. The problem, of course, was that other people bring with them their own cultures. especially the Jews, because the Jews were not just a race, but they were also a religion, and religion is culture. I mean, it's hard to overemphasize that, because you can have multiple religions inside of a country. Look at any Christian nation. There are so many different kinds and denominations of Christians out there. Many of them are blatantly and flatly incompatible. But are they all the same people? Yeah, more or less. But each one of them has a different culture. So religion is culture. And what they wanted was to make sure that there would be no other culture in Germany, or at least no other culture that could influence them. So, by stripping them of their citizenship, you now make sure that these people can't vote, they can't represent, they can't do anything. Nothing government related. So that was the first step. But it wasn't the only one, not by a long shot. After that, they introduced this. This is the Nuremberg Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. Now, some of these websites are a little bit... I do question them sometimes, but they all seem to be pretty good. This one, for example, is a Hebrew website. I'm sure it's going to be very fair. Then again, a lot of this is history, so if we have historical evidence to back it up, I have no reason not to take it at its word. This does get a little bit hard because some of the examples I was looking for I could not find, and so I have not included them, because if I could not find anything to actually uphold it, I left it out. But the Nuremberg Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. Let me make this a little bit bigger so that I can read it. So, subsection 1. Marriages between Jews and the subjects of the state of German or related blood are forbidden. Marriages nevertheless concluded are invalid, even if concluded abroad to circumvent this law. And Part 2. The annulment proceedings can be initiated only by the state prosecutor. Subsection 2. Extramarital intercourse between Jews and the subjects of the German state or German or related blood are forbidden. Subsection 3. Jews may not employ in their households female subjects of the state of German or blood who are under 45 years old. In other words, breeding age. Subsection 4. Jews are forbidden to fly the Reich or national flag or to display Reich colors. They are, on the other hand, permitted to fly Jewish colors. The exercise of this right is protected by the state. Now that is very interesting, isn't it? They're not allowed to fly the state flag, but they are allowed to fly their own flag. Meaning that you have the option of flying nothing or outing yourself. And then we get into the punishments. Which, by the way, the punishments are prison sentence or hard labor, prison sentence or hard labor, prison sentence, fines, other penalties. Basically, concentration camp. I mean, that is a prison sentence with hard labor. You're going to a camp. In the Soviet Union, they called them gulags. But it's the same concept. So, they passed this, meaning that, number one, any relations between Germans and Jews are now criminal. You're not allowed to marry them. You're not allowed to sleep with them. You're not allowed to breed with them. And anything that you do will result in you being removed from the population, either temporarily or permanently. And I'm not sure there was a whole lot of temporary in those punishments. They basically made association a crime. And I say basically because actually making association with Jews a crime would come later. But in this case, you could not marry a Jew if you were German, you could not marry a German if you were a Jew, and anyone who was married before then under subsection 1, number 2, ooh, had to sneeze. The annulment proceedings can be initiated only by the state prosecutor, and by the state prosecutor they were. If you happen to be married, and it was an interracial marriage, your marriage would be dissolved. They would not need to ask you. They would not need to, bother bringing you in. All they have to do is pull your paperwork, dissolve the marriage on paper, go to the house, and make sure that you and your partner are separated. Now, what happens to the kids then? Oh, we'll get to that later. Because we know what happens to the kids later. So after that, there was the Reich flag law, which we saw. That was down here. Then, now that we've stripped Jews of their citizenship, okay, and by stripping them of their citizenship, we've also stripped them of their rights, okay, because Germany did have its own, I'm not sure if it was a constitution, but they had their own list of rights, which were suspended under the Reich Fire Decree, but regardless, they had their own thing of rights. Once you are no longer a citizen, you no longer have rights. Now you can no longer marry. Let's get on to the next one. This is the law for the restoration of civil service. This is very simple. The German government issues the law for the restoration of professional civil service, which excludes Jews and other political opponents, which, by the way, remember how I said we get to the communists later? Other political opponents of the Nazis from all civil service positions. This law initially exempts those who had worked in the civil service since August 1, 1914, those who were veterans of World War I, or with a father or son killed in action in World War I. However, note that it says initially. That changed. The German government also issues a new law concerning membership in the bar, which mandates the disbarment of any non-Aryan lawyers by September 30th, 1933. Exempted from the position are Jewish lawyers practicing law since 1914, or Jewish lawyers who are of German veterans of World War I. But again, recall above where it said initially. So to sum up those two paragraphs, what this means is that any Jew, or basically any non-German, was barred from working in any kind of civil service position. They mention lawyers here, but that's going to be lawyers, advocates, paralegals, anything like that. We're also talking things like doctors. We're talking about anybody who... It's civil service. Basically, any kind of government position that works with the public. Jews are no longer allowed to do. In fact, nobody who is not German is allowed to do. And as I said, initially exempted those who worked in civil service before, or who were veterans or related to veterans, but that was later repealed as well. So only Germans, only the Aryan race was allowed to work in government and was allowed to do civil service. Again, we're just putting one more step between the German state and anybody who is not German. Then, there was the law against the overcrowding of German schools. Right here. Now, this is a little bit longer. It says, after passing anti-Semitic legislation to purge Jewish facilities from German universities in April, they continued the process of removing Jews from public life by targeting Jewish students. The law against overcrowding in schools and institutions of higher education passed in 1933 that set strict limitations on the number of Jewish students permitted to attend both public and private schools and universities. Earlier drafts, we don't really care about the earlier drafts. I don't really care that much. The point is that they went through and passed a law that said non-Germans are not allowed to go to school now. Now, let's keep in mind that this whole law for the restoration of professional civil service, this would apply to teachers as well. So we've already said that non-Germans are not allowed to teach. Now we're saying that non-Germans are not even allowed to go to school. Again, one more step pushing them outside of society. You are not allowed to be influential by being a teacher, and you are no longer allowed to learn. And by the way, just because they bar these people from doing it, does that mean that these people are going to simply say, well, I can't go to German school, so I guess I'll just not go to school then, right? No. It means that you're going to end up with these enclaves of people inside of Germany. You'll end up with Jewish enclaves, Jewish settlements, where they will have their own teachers, they will have their own schools, they will have everything they need to get by. And they will be kept very insular, they'll all be kept in one place by choice. You don't need to push them into doing it, since Jewish teachers can't teach anymore. They will find a building and they will start their own school. Since Jewish students can no longer go to school, they will go to the Jewish school. I mean, this is just how things work. And so now you have them pretty well self-segregated. But it doesn't stop here. After that, let's see, what was the next one to come out? Let's see, that was 1933. These aren't perfectly in order. We also had, right, the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. Now, this has a lot of overlap with a lot of other various different things. This was a very, very broad law, and one that really could warrant its own lecture on its own, but we're not going to go too deeply into it right now. But here's what happened. It stated that any person suffering from a hereditary disease may be rendered incapable of procreation by means of surgical operation, i.e. sterilization. If the experience of medical science shows that it is highly probable that the descendants would suffer from some serious physical or mental hereditary defect. For the purposes of this law, any person will be considered as hereditarily diseased who is suffering from one of the following diseases: cognitive mental deficiency, that is to say, retardation. And this could be any number of things, because when we talk about mental retardation, that could mean Down syndrome, that could mean autism, that could mean Asperger's, what else? It could mean dyslexia. That's the one I was trying to think of. It's somewhat coincidental that I'm struggling to think of the word dyslexia because I just can't picture it. So yes, anything that would be considered a cognitive mental deficiency would be grounds for sterilization. Schizophrenia, manic depressive insanity, what would later be called bipolar disorder. Epilepsy, chorea, which would later be called Huntington's disease. Hereditary blindness, hereditary deafness, which means, by the way, I would be on the list. And any severe hereditary deformity. Again, we go back to Down syndrome, but anything from clubfoot to hunchback. Okay, even if you just have like a history of scoliosis in your family, you could be subject to sterilization. It also says any person suffering from severe alcoholism may be rendered incapable of procreation. Now, this is important because not only is this horrifying on its own, and it is absolutely horrifying, but remember up here where it says, if the experience of a medical science shows that it is highly probable that the descendants would suffer from some sort of physical or mental hereditary defect. Meaning that it was not actually up to you. It was up to a doctor. And remember, back here, when I said that, the law for the restoration of civil services would prevent non-Germans from being doctors. which means that you are going to have a German who is going to be determining whether or not you, a non-German, have the right to breed. We're going to come back to this later on when we talk about what they did to the communists as well. Because many people who went to these places were not necessarily deficient in some way. They were inconvenient. And so they could have opened up the death camps. Or they could have simply waited until, 2 or 3 generations down the road when there simply would not be any more Jews or any more blacks or any more anybody who wasn't German. This also, if we come down here and look at the see alsos, Action T4. Now, if you're not familiar with this one, I did mention it before when we talked about maid service, which has been spreading across Europe and North America. Action T4 was a German medical program where they would take people who were generally infirm in some way or incapable of taking care of themselves. We're talking about the psychologically disabled or the physically disabled, whether it was due to deformity, injury, or age. And they would simply be euthanized. At first, of course, they did this with a friendly facade, saying that we have homes for these people. We have medical facilities for these people. We have asylums for these people. What they were really doing, however, is that every person who went in would be held for a period of time where they could be, adjudicated and observed, and then they would simply be euthanized. And it does say right here, in the first year of the law's operation, in 1934, there were 84,500 cases brought to the genetic health courts, with 62,500 forced sterilizations. Nearly 4,000 people appealed against the decisions of sterilization, and of the 4,000, nearly 4,000, 3,559 of the appeals failed. Okay? That is a failure rate of, what is that, 95%? 93%? Something like that. In 1935, it was 88,000. And by the end of the Nazi regime, over 200 of these courts were created, and under their rulings, over 400,000 people sterilized against their will. And again, they weren't going to be Germans. They were going to be everybody else. So, now that we've got that depressing topic out of the way, let's continue. After that, let's see. Right. The law on the altercation of family and personal names. I do believe it was. No? Wait, did I skip one? Nope, I did skip one. Hold on, before we do that one. Right. The exclusion of Jews from German economic life. Okay? So, we've already talked about how before, Jews were prevented from working in civil service, and then they were prevented from going to school. Now we get to the exclusion of Jews from German economic life. And this one pretty much explicitly targeted Jews, but trust me, it was expanded to everybody. So it said in 1938, the German government issues the decree of the elimination of Jews from the economic life. The decree bars Jews from operating retail stores, sales agencies, and from carrying on a trade. The law also forbids Jews from selling goods or services at an establishment of any kind. So even if somebody else owns the store, you are not allowed to work there, you're not allowed to sell anything there, you're not allowed to do anything. Now, I have talked before about cancel culture in the West. I have talked at length about the idea that, with cancel culture, the purpose is simple. If you can stop somebody from gaining their basic necessities. That is to say, if you can keep them from getting food, if you can keep them from getting water, if you can keep them from shelter, they will eventually be forced to either die out or leave. If you can keep somebody from having a job, if you can keep them from trading in currency, then you can prevent them from either owning or renting a place to stay. You can keep them from buying the food they need to live. You can keep them from getting access to potable water. And if you deny these things, they're called the rules for survival for a reason. You will die without them. This would really be no different than taking somebody, plucking them, like, The Sims, plucking them out of the city and dropping them into the middle of the Rocky Mountains. The only difference is, in the Rocky Mountains, you would be allowed to try and hunt for water and food. You would be allowed to build a shelter. Whereas the way cancel culture operates, you're not allowed to. You are forbidden from even trying. The only option available to you is failure, and as a matter of practice, failure will be enforced. So too did you see this in pre-war Germany, where Jews were not allowed to participate. You were not allowed to work. You were not allowed to sell. You were not allowed to operate business of any kind. You could not work for the state. You could not work for yourself. You could not work for any other private citizen. You were simply not allowed. Failure was enforced. During the 6 years of Hitler's dictatorship from 1933 to the outbreak of the war, Jews felt the effects of more than 400 decrees and regulations. By the way, we're only covering like 8 or 9. But this restricted all aspects of their public and private lives. Many were national laws that had been issued by the German administration, but state, regional, and municipal officials on their own initiatives also promulgated? I'm not actually familiar with that word. A barrage of exclusionary decrees in their own communities. But the only thing we really care about here is the fact that they were not allowed to even operate their own businesses. Then we get into the next one. The laws and the alterations of family and personal names. That is to say that eventually, a lot of Jews started to catch on to what was going on here. And they said, you know what? We have a decision to make. We can either continue to be Jews in Germany, and we can continue to suffer under all of this, or what if we just hide? And I don't mean in the attic. I mean hide in plain sight. What if we just change our names? I mean, instead of being Bartholomew, why don't we become Gunther? Okay? And what if we just change our last name? For example, I had a teacher, I don't even know if he's still alive these days, but his name was Mr. Maharg. He was my 5th grade teacher when I was in elementary school. And one of the things that was interesting about him that he told us later on in the year is that his family's name was not actually Maharg. The reason why is because his family had actually fled Nazi Germany, and they fled to the US. And during that time, the US was actually in the practice of sending them back. They said, nope, we're not taking people, we're not getting involved in this, we're not doing it. So if you had a name that looked German or Jewish, then you probably weren't getting into the US. What this family did, though, is they simply spelled the name backwards. Maharg, backwards, was Graham. And I forget whether that was a German or a Jewish name. I'm not sure where it falls in between those. But many other Jews were starting to do the same thing at this time. Eventually, the Germans caught on to this as well, and they simply said, nope, we're not allowing that. So the executive order on the law of the alteration of family and personal names required German Jews bearing first names of non-Jewish origin to adopt an additional name, either Israel for men or Sarah for women. So even if you were of Jewish descent, and even if you did change your name to Gunther, then you would have to adopt a Jewish Israel on the end of your name to identify you as a Jew. It also required them to identify themselves in ways that would permanently separate them from the rest of the German population, and this was before the Yellow Stars. So here we go. Jewish men and women bearing first names of non-Jewish origin had to add Israel Sarah, yes. They were obliged to carry identity cards that indicated their heritage, and in the autumn of 1938, all Jewish passports were stamped with an identifying red letter J. As Nazi leaders quickened their preparations, anti-Semitic legislation in Germany and Austria paved the way for more radical persecution of Jews. This is kind of the origin of the Papers, Please meme, where you would be required to carry your papers, and if you could not present them, then you must be a bad person. Of course, if you did present them and it had a great big J on it, well, then you're a bad person. But hey, you know what? It gets worse. It's Nazi Germany. Of course it gets worse. After that, we're going to go back for a minute. Remember this. The exclusion of Jews from German and economic life. Okay? Where they were no longer allowed to operate retail stores, sales agencies, and carrying on trades. Well, after that, after all the willing Jews had shut down, now it was time to go after the unwilling Jews. 1941. Or wait, no. Hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't actually have a page for this one. So I'm just going to have to talk about it. Kristallnacht. The reason I didn't pull this one was because not actually a law. But Kristallnacht came after the exclusion of Jews from German economic life. Kristallnacht, in other words, the Night of Broken Glass, was when they went around and destroyed all the German stores. Any building that was owned or operated, and that's an or. If it was owned by a Jew, but Germans worked there, it was destroyed. If it was owned by a German, but Jews worked there, it was destroyed. Anywhere that was tainted by the touch of a Jew was destroyed. Just to further cement that Jews are not allowed to have anything. They are not allowed to do anything. They are not allowed to even exist. But they do exist. And so that's what we had to solve next. Now we get to 1941. Now I couldn't find an actual image here, or an actual page on the laws that were passed. This was the best I could come up with. But what I have here, it was the Decree on the Annihilation of the Jews, 1941. And it says here in my search, it authorized the systematic mass murder of the Jews through methods such as mass shootings or extermination camps. Like I said, I couldn't find the actual decree. But obviously we know it happened, so I got this. At some point in 1941, Hitler, Himmler, Heydrich, and other top personnel reached the decision to physically annihilate the Jews of Europe. This is where they said all of those ghettos that we had created, all those enclaves where the Jews had centralized, after we had pushed them out of every single other German space, it's time to go clean them out. And we don't really care how you do it. If you can kettle them all in their enclave and shoot them all, do it. If you can't do that, put them on the trains and take them to the camps, and we'll do it there. This was the beginning of the end for the Jewish people in Germany. But just because it was the beginning of the end doesn't mean it was the beginning. Again, we can go all the way back to the 1930s. This was 35, wasn't it? Yeah, this was 35. We can go all the way back to 1933 in a lot of these. Yeah, this one was 1933, where they were removing the Jews from citizenship, from social life or social positions, and from schools. That's 8 years before the authorization of just the Jewish extermination. It didn't happen overnight. And as I pointed out, when it came to the law and the alteration of names, many Jews saw this coming. Many Jews got out of Germany before this could happen. They said, nope, we're not going to be here for this. Others tried to fly under the radar until the radar got down to them. So we look at this and we can say, if you were a Jew, or if you were a black, or if you were any other not German in Germany during this time, what would you have done? And it is something that I think that you should think about, because it's introspective in a way that most people would never even consider. What would you have done? I've talked about this kind of thing when I talk about cities. For example, just this week in Philadelphia, which is like 2.5, 3 hours from me, there was an incident where over 100 teenagers went through and ransacked an entire street of stores. One of the most notable things is they broke into an Apple store, and they stole a whole bunch of iPhones and iPads and things like that. However, Apple has gotten wise to this, so all of their devices were set to brick themselves if they left the geofence of the store. And so what did all these teenagers do? They destroyed them. Apparently, when the police got there and they, had more or less cleared out the area, they found an entire pile of phones and tablets and other devices that had been broken and destroyed. Because if they weren't of use to the people who stole them, then they would at least get the catharsis of simply destroying it. And the Apple Store was the biggest example, but there were many other stores that were also hit along the way. We've mentioned before this happened in Chicago, it's happened in San Francisco, it's happened in LA, it's happened in Seattle, it's happened in Portland. And I have said before, when do you get out? Because a lot of people will look at the situation and they'll say, I can't leave. My job is here. What am I supposed to do? Or my kids go to school here. What am I supposed to do with them? How do I handle this? And my answer to them was, is, and probably always will be the same. I don't care. Get out. Because I look at this and I say, what is different from this flash mob attack in Philadelphia and the bombed out ruins of Bosnia? Now, most of the people that are watching this, okay, I take it back. I was actually pretty young when the war in Bosnia happened. But I would wager that most of the people watching this were probably alive during that war. Which, if you're not familiar, Bosnia-Herzegovina was a country in southern Europe. And it has since split into Bosnia and... well, is it just Bosnia and Herzegovina now? I'm not sure. I haven't looked in a really long time because, let's be honest, that was the last globally relevant thing they ever did. Either way, though, the people who lived there, do you think they stopped and said, but, I mean, yes, I know they're shelling the buildings, but my job is here. Yes, I know they're rolling tanks down Main Street, but my kids have to go to school. No. No. When the first shell started hitting, they said, get the hell out. They said, here, You grab a bag of stuff, you grab a bag of stuff. Take all of your precious stuff. Okay? Take anything that's valuable to you. Take clothes, take food, fill every canister we have with water, because we don't know when we're going to get water again. Pack it all in bags. Give a bag to the children. The adults will take 2, 3, 4 bags, and we're leaving. Because sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to leave. I have said the same thing about the cities, where sometimes you just have to leave. And when I say that, I don't say that out of some kind of place of ignorance. I say that out of a place of experience. Not direct experience, obviously. I have never had to live through a war zone. And fingers crossed, although it seems to be less likely now today than ever before, I should never have to. However, we can look to history and see what happens when you don't. I do see that Blizz is in the chat. Hello, Blizz. Good to see you there. And Tuck says people in Bosnia have the option to rebuild. They do. And you know what? Someday, the people in these cities may have the option to rebuild too. But they first have to survive it. And we look back even further into history to pre-war Germany. We can see the same thing happened there. We can see that there was an entire group of people who was being persecuted, okay? The area was dangerous for them. And by the way, while it's not listed in here because we're just talking about the legislation, we're not even touching on the social and civil treatment of Jews in Germany. They do say that politics is downstream from culture. Okay? This is true. Because politics, and by extension law, is just the enforcement of culture. Okay? If you have a culture that says murder is okay, then it's highly unlikely that murder will be illegal in your state. However, if you're part of a culture who says that murder should be illegal, then it's very likely that murder will be murder is wrong. Then murder will probably be illegal. Okay? Politics, law, downstream from culture. So when we look at these places, when we look at pre-war Germany, and we say, we want to get rid of Jews in schools, do you think that they weren't trying to kick Jews out of schools before this happened? No, of course they were. Do you think there weren't many attacks on Jewish people, as well as black people, Arab people, Asian people, anybody who wasn't German, but happened to be in Germany? No, of course there were. And of course, we know what it led up to. So why do I want to talk about this? I want to talk about this for one reason. We have seen the rise of this happening again in modern-day Western countries. And when I say that, let's go back and look at some of these things. Have we seen anybody who has been stripped of their citizenship? No, not yet. Okay, this hasn't happened yet. However, we have seen people's rights be stripped from them. Their citizenship has. But what honestly does citizenship give you if you have no rights and privileges that go along with it? If you are an American citizen, but you have no right to free speech, you have no right to bear arms, you have no right to use or to your own property, you have no protection from search and seizure, you have no right to due process, you have no right to a court system and advocacy. If you have none of these rights, then your only privilege as a citizen is to pay taxes. Congratulations. You must be so happy with it. So while we haven't lost citizenship yet, we have lost every meaningful thing that goes along with citizenship. Have we seen the dissolution of marriages and partnerships? No, we have not. However, we have seen the dissolution or the weakening of the entire system of marriage. The last estimate that I heard of was that marriage has been so weakened that roughly 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And I've heard that a lot, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's probably true. I even heard that even if you go to church, if you are a religious person, you know, you're Christian, maybe even you're Catholic, even if you find somebody inside the church and you get married, that the divorce rate among religious couples is half of the norm. That is to say, that even if you get married inside the church, the divorce rate is about 25%. Which means that they don't really need people, or they don't need a prosecutor to break up the marriages. The people are doing it on their own. And on top of that, this was done to keep German blood pure. They did not want intermarriage. Whereas in most Western countries, we actually encourage that. So, am I saying that, you know, that's bad, that we should be trying to make some kind of white supremacist state in the US and Canada, Britain, all that? No. What I am saying, however, is that the people who do care about this kind of thing, they're kind of already doing it. Mostly, they didn't want Germany to be weakened. They wanted Germans to be pure and strong. If you want to weaken Germany, then you would actually encourage that kind of thing. And what does it seem to be doing for most countries in the West? As, you know, family relationships break down, as the family unit breaks down, it is making them weaker. It is absolutely making them weaker. I think I heard a statistic once that in the black communities, I think it was something along the lines of 90% of all black children have no idea who their father is. Or even if they do know who their father is, they have basically no contact with them. 90%. Doesn't need to be enforced at a state level. They're doing it to themselves. When we talk about the law for the restoration of civil service and preventing people from even practicing law, or, you know, any kind of other civil service, we have had many different kinds of policies put in place, many corporate mantras, things of that nature, which have said that we need to get more of one race in than another. Generally speaking, it's always we need to have more black people, we need to have more women in, we need to have more of any other group besides one. So we've already got that going for us. Laws against overcrowding, same thing. When it comes to things like university admissions, we literally just had a massive Supreme Court case, which actually ruled that this was illegal. The Supreme Court case, I forget what it was Harvard versus somebody. But Harvard had been discriminating against Asian students because Asian students tend to outperform academically all other groups. And in fact, outperform many other groups combined. And so Harvard had decided that they would simply bar certain races from even applying. This was, of course, found illegal, but the fact that they did it is what matters. And Harvard has stated, as well as many other universities, including several that I will not mention in the state of Pennsylvania as well, have come out and strictly stated that they will ignore the ruling and they will continue to weigh their racial admissions. Because the court actually doesn't have any power. Again, culture determines politics, policy, and law. And the culture currently wants racism. The law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, I have talked about this before in terms of MAID. I am not going to go over it again. If you want to hear more about that, go see my previous lectures. The exclusion of Jews from German economic life, we haven't seen this one just yet. However, it's coming. And the reason why I say it's coming is because in some places, like the big cities, we are seeing that things like business licenses are being denied from people who are not of the right skin color, the right gender, the right religion, the right anything. They're not having their businesses stripped yet, but yet there is the key word. We are seeing an actual movement to segregate on racial lines the United States, Canada, the UK, Germany, France. I mean, Germany's wild. It's like they're doing it again, and everyone's just kind of like, thumbs up. So I did a quick search. I searched only for BIPOC only spaces. If you're not familiar with the word BIPOC, it is an acronym. It stands for Black and Indigenous People of Color, which is kind of all-encompassing. That means that anybody who is black, anybody who is indigenous, or anybody who falls into the broad category of people of color. That being usually Hispanic, Asian, Islander, any of them. And the one thing that I didn't pick any of these to go into because I just want to see the search results, but something that I want to bring to attention. What's the first one? Cambridge, Massachusetts.gov. Do you understand what it takes to get a .gov on your website? The .gov domain has to be given to you by the government. You have to be registered as a government entity to get a .gov domain. This is the government presenting an argument why people of color need spaces without white people. I want to juxtapose that heading right there against this. Because the comparisons write themselves. If we continue down, this is from medium.com, why you should support BIPOC-only spaces for healing. Really, you could replace healing with any other thing you wanted. The important part is why you should support these spaces where you say, no, whites are not allowed. This is from the National Institute of Health, another .gov domain. There would be more black spaces. This is from The Guardian. Why there's nothing racist about black-only spaces. If you were to replace black with German, you could slot it right back here into everything we just covered. Why there's nothing racist about German-only spaces. Why there should be more German spaces. Why you should support German-only spaces for healing. Why people of German descent need spaces without Jewish people. From Yale Sociology, the Jew space. The fine line between safe space and segregation says, while many see the creation of safe spaces for black students, LGBT students, and other minorities as a positive step towards helping them. Let's see, rethinking safe spaces. Let's see, yoga for us? BIPOC-only spaces. Okay, see, I mean, apparently it's a thing in yoga too. Why people of color need spaces without white people. The reason I wanted to have this conversation today is because we are seeing the same steps being taken. There's a reason why when I put out my my notification for this, and I put those out on Discord, so if you're not in my Discord and you'd like to join us there, the link is there. Come join us. We don't bite, I promise. I also put it out in several other Discords, but I said, every cautionary tale is also an instruction manual for those of, suitable persuasion. Every single one of us should be able to look back to what the Nazis were doing in Germany and say, yeah, let's not do that. However, you're also going to have some people that are going to say, okay, no, let's do that. However, let's not make the same mistakes they did. And this is just the Jews. We're almost an hour and a half into this, and I have not even touched on the communists yet. But don't worry, we're going to get there. I just wanted to wrap this up neatly with this nice little BIPOC bow. To point out that, yeah, we are going there. We're doing it again. But let's go ahead and get to this next one. So let me just switch here to a different browser window. I want that one. All right. So now let's go ahead and talk about the other group there. So we just talked about the Jews in Germany, as well as other racial minorities. But that wasn't the only people that the Germans hated. No, not by a long shot. No. The Germans also hated the communists, which was kind of ironic given that they were the Nationalist Socialist Party. But you know what? Communists hate themselves. Communists and socialists also hate each other. So when we look at what happened with the communists, we had to go all the way back to the Reichstag fire. Now, the Reichstag fire is an interesting point in history that many other people have discussed, and if you want more information about that, I suggest going on to YouTube and looking it up yourself. There's a lot to it. I'm not going to cover the Reichstag fire here. All I'm going to say is that, 1933, that makes it 90 years ago. So 90 years later, we still technically do not know who did it. Now, there was somebody who was arrested, was convicted, was executed over the Reichstag fire. But questions still remain as to who did it and for what reasons. What we do know, for absolute certain, is what happened afterwards. So I told you when we discussed the Jews that they had gone through and they had removed citizenship and rights from many people. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. This is where it all starts. So we're going to skip the little preamble here. We don't really care about that right now. What we do want to see, however, is the actual act itself. So Article 1. Sections 114, 15, 17, 18, 23, and 24, and 53 of the Constitution of the German Reich are suspended until further notice. Therefore, the restrictions on personal liberty, the right of free expression of opinion, including freedom of the press, right of assembly, right of association, and violations of privacy of postal, telegraphic, telephonic communications, warrants for house searches, orders for confiscations, as well as the restrictions on property, are also permissible beyond the legal limits otherwise prescribed. In other words, to put this in an American context, the Bill of Rights has been suspended. Not one, not a couple, not half, all of them have been suspended. Article 2, if the state measures necessary for the restoration of public security are in order not taken, the Reich government may temporarily take over the powers of the highest state authority. To translate that into simple speech, the Nazi Party now has the ability to take over the government by simple action. All they have to do is state that we're in control now, and they are. Which, by the way, this would later be followed by the Enabling Act, and you know what happens after that. Number 3, orders decreed on the basis of Article 2 by the Reich government, the authorities, states, and provinces are concerned have to abide thereby. In other words, if we take over under Article 2, everybody now has to do what we say under Article 3. And so on and so forth. Article 4, whoever provokes or appeals for or incites the disobedience of the orders given out by the supreme state authorities or the authorities subject to them for execution of this decree or orders given by the Reich government, according to Article 2, is punishable insofar as the deed is not covered. Blah, 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 blah. We really don't need to read the entire thing. And then Article 5 doesn't matter. Okay, why are we talking about this? The Reichstag was the equivalent of the British Parliament or the Canadian Parliament or the US Congress, okay? It was the gathering place for the duly elected, I shall talk in English for rest of lecture. No, it was the gathering place for the duly elected representatives from all the German states to come and discuss law. After the Reichstag fire, however, a couple of things happened. Number 1, the Nazis, being the dominant political party at the time, I believe. I think they were at the time. Or maybe that came later. I'm not sure. Either way, the Nazis blamed the communists and everyone else just kind of piled on. So the communists took the fall. So the communists got blamed for the Reichstag fire, and because of the decree, they were basically stripped of all power afterwards. Now, it needs to be reiterated. The Nazis hated the communists. You may have heard of Weimar Germany. You may have heard about it because in Weimar Germany, you essentially had two political groups that were in power. They were the communists and they were the socialists. And they hated each other. The reason why Weimar Germany was so very, very important is because these two groups had diverged to the point where there was no longer any middle ground. There was no longer anything that the two groups were willing to agree upon because it had dissolved to the point where they were essentially disagreeing on things out of principle. If one side said it, then the other must disagree. If the socialists proposed something, the communists would vote against it. If the communists voted against it, the socialists would disagree. Which is to say, if the socialists had their house on fire and the communists had put up a vote to put the fire out, the socialists probably would have voted to let their own house burn, rather than be seen agreeing with the communists. They hated them that much. There was no reconciliation. And the reason why this has become such a hot topic right now is because we see this divide in modern politics. We see it between the conservatives and the liberals in Canada. We see it between, what would it be, the conservatives and Labour in Britain? I'm not sure. Britain has like 5 major parties and I can't keep them straight. But we see that also between the Republicans and the Democrats in the US, where there is almost no crossover anymore. And not only do we see that in government, we see that in the population. We see violence between people of opposite political persuasions because it no longer matters what you may have done. All that matters now is just what party are you a part of, because that tells you all you need to know about that person. If they are a Democrat, if they are a liberal, if they are a conservative, if they are a Republican, that tells you everything you need to know, and you are justified in doing whatever you want to them after that point. A couple of lectures ago, I talked about a guy who tried to set a Trump sign on fire. Why? Did he know the person that lived there? No. Did he care about the person that was there? Also no. He saw a Trump sign, That told him everything he needed to know about the person who lived inside that house, and he tried to burn it down. Now, of course, he says that he was only trying to burn the sign down, but there was a U.S. flag hanging over it. A U.S. flag that was attached to a tree. And next to that tree was another tree, their boughs touching. And next to that tree was the house, the roof and boughs touching. So it was either ignorance that anything more would happen, in which case this person is supremely stupid and should probably not be allowed out as a public danger, or they knew full well what could happen, and maybe they were secretly hoping for it. But either way, we are already at that point where it no longer matters who you are, it just matters what you are. And that was a situation we saw in Weimar Germany, and after the Reichstag fire, it only got worse. So, after that, we've now stripped the civil rights from basically everybody. Meaning that the only power left in Germany is power. You have no rights. You have no protections. You have nothing. You are not a citizen anymore. You are a subject. And so after that, there was the law against the founding of new parties. And unfortunately, Wikipedia was pretty much the best I could get for this one. So, it says here, the Reich government has passed the following law, which is hereby promulgated. The National Socialist German Workers' Party is now the only political party in Germany. Okay, right there. That is all you really need to know. The Communist Party no longer exists. Any other party, whether there was a worker party or a union or anything else, they no longer exist. Every single other party has been dissolved. The Nazis now have 100% control of the Reichstag and every single facet of the government. Subsection 2. Anybody who undertakes to maintain the organization and cohesion of another political party or to form a new political party will be sentenced to imprisonment for up to 3 years or jailed from 6 months to 3 years unless the act is punishable with a higher penalty by other regulations. So, not only have all other parties been dissolved, but if you so much as even try to maintain your affiliation with other people in your party, or try to maintain power through your collective group, that's prison. The communists are now gone, and any attempt from the communists to rise again will be slapped down by the state itself. And Tuck says, I think the guy knew burning the guy's house down was possible, but didn't care. Burning the sign down was his goal. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think most people understand that fire spreads. It's just that most people don't think that far ahead. And thus, they don't care about it. Alright, so, now that we've got the communists out, we've already blamed the Reichstag fire on them. Now the Communist Party no longer exists. However, as many people like to point out, if, say, the Democrats were to win a supermajority in everything, okay? They stack the court, and now they have 7 or 9 justices as opposed to the conservatives' 5, okay? They hold the presidency. They take over the entire Congress. So they got a majority in the Senate, they've got a majority in the House. They have total unitarian control over the federal government. Let's say that they made the Republican Party illegal. Okay? Dissolved. It's gone. The people didn't disappear. They're still out there. What do we do about them? Well, we're going to get into that. Because, well, those people are still out there, but you know what? There's still more we can do about that. What about their children? So this came in 1936. This is the Law on the Hitler Youth. This page was really, really tiny, so I had to blow it up a lot. That's why it's a little fuzzy. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, too. So now it's fuzzier. So, this is the education of the youth was one of the leading priorities in the general mobilization of the population and National Socialist spirit. Future generations of German peoples, rest in the soldiers of ideological steadfast young people, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The only thing really important here is that what this did is it made participation in the Hitler Youth mandatory. So it says here that numerous sticks and carrots were used to get children and young people to join, but right here, the Law on the Hitler Youth, subsection 1. All of the German youth in the Reich is organized within the Hitler Youth. Basically, it's mandatory. If you are going to be a child in Germany, you're participating. Failure to do so shall be punished. Subsection 2. The German youth, besides being reared within the family and school, shall be educated physically, intellectually, and morally in the spirit of the National Socialism to serve the people and the community through the Hitler Youth. Subsection 3. The task of educating German youth through the Hitler Youth is being entrusted to the Reich leader of the German youth of the NSDAP. NSDAP, by the way, is Nazi. Forget if I can get a translation for this. Hold on a second. NSDAP. Let's see if I can even pronounce this. It is, let me move my microphone over here a little bit so I can read from the other screen. The National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei? I'm not sure. It's really long, really complicated, and German is really hard. But it's the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Something like that. Often abbreviated simply as NSDAP. That's the best I can do. If somebody else can do better, hats off to you. Unless you actually are German, in which case you have an unfair advantage and you're not allowed to participate in this challenge. Alright, so yeah, now you know. NSDAP, you can just swap that out with Nazi. The position of the office is that of higher government agency within the seat of Berlin, directly responsible to the Fuhrer and the Chancellor of the Reich. Okay, all regulations necessary for the execution and completion of the law will be issued. Yeah, we get that. So that was the Law on Hitler Youth. Basically, you were not allowed to raise your children. Okay? Didn't matter who you were. Like, if you were already a National Socialist in Germany, then this was, like, perfect. Because this was just better and further education for your kids. However, if you were not, if you happen to be a communist and you happen to have children, now you are being mandated to give your children to the National Socialists for them to do with whatever they want, really. And so, all they have to do is simply educate their children and send them back. And as the older generation ages out, as the grandparents and parents die out, there will be, in the end, no more communists. By the way, if this sounds at all familiar, keep it to yourself. We're going to get to that later. I mean, don't get too far ahead. We're going to take our time. We'll get there. So after that, let's see. There was the... I can't read this. The Reichenstrand Law? German is hard. And I also could not find this law, but I did find something else talking about it. So this was the best I could do. This is a summary of a book, but I don't have access to the library, so yeah. But this says the agricultural reorganization of the Third Reich, the Reich Food Corporation, or Reich. I can't read that. Oh, this is entertainment, isn't it? The Reichsnarstand? I don't know. Should I do an entire stream of just me trying to pronounce unpronounceable and incomprehensible words? I'll just get a stream of people sending me further and further incomprehensible words until we get to something from like the Zulu. Anyway, though, while I don't have the actual decree here, what this was is essentially they made it so that the communists were not allowed to really participate in the agricultural industry, food distribution, food production, or anything like that. Let's see, where's my summary here? Yeah, there it is. So it established strict control over agriculture and food production, suppressing communist-influenced rural movements. So what happened was the state basically took over all the farmland. They took over all the cropland, they took over all the pastures, they took over everything, so that none of the communists would be allowed to actually manage all of this. And this did two things. Number one, you got to remember they're socialists, okay? So the Nazi Party was all about, we control everything, we will give you what you deserve. Because that's what socialism does. It takes everything and then redistributes equally. Socialism. More importantly, though, it gave them an in. See, they'd already removed the communists from government. They'd already taken all the communist children from them, and now they can re-educate them to be good little socialists. But what about all the actual adults who are still out there? Well, now they could go through and they could actually start hunting them down. Let's not forget the law against the formation of political parties. If you are still a member of a communist bloc, you are breaking the law. If you are organizing with other people, you are breaking the law. And so, by going out to where the communists are, you can thereby keep an eye on them, and every time you see them talking about it, or organizing, or gathering, or anything, you can snatch them up and ship them out. They're extending their net. So after this, which I'm not going to try and pronounce again, I don't care how entertaining it is, we're going to get back to here. Let's see. Decree for the protection. Right. So on one list says it's the law for the protection of the people and the state. I found it under the name of the Treachery Act. I think they're related though, but I'm not entirely certain. I couldn't find any really good information on this. But basically, the Treachery Act 1934 established that there were penalties for the abuse of Nazi Party badges and uniforms, restricted the right to the freedom of speech, and criminalized all remarks causing putative severe damage to the welfare of the Third Reich, the prestige of the Nazi government, or the Nazi Party. Okay. So what does this mean in basic terms? What it means is that the Nazi Party could now control what you were allowed to say if you were a part of the Nazi Party. That is to say, if you were in uniform, you could not speak ill of the Nazi Party. And for that matter, if you were a part of the party in general, you could not speak ill of it. This did two things. Number one, it helped keep them in line. And it helped keep them in line in a way that we're going to get to, like, really quickly. I'm going to hold off on that point for just a minute, because the other point it did is it prevented them from being infiltrated. It's called the Treachery Act for a reason. The idea here was that now that the communists had been barred from basically everything, it meant that a communist could not enter into the Nazis. Because if you were to enter into the Nazis and you were to say anything that was communist in nature, well, then you could be punished. It also meant that, if you were infiltrating them and you said something to the wrong person outside, well, then we would know who you are. It just further helped them track down any remaining communists, anybody who was trying to get information, or even people who were just trying to survive but didn't want to give up their old ideals. It was just a further method of taking care of them. Furthermore, we're going to come back to this one. You remember we did this one before? We did this one before. There is the law for the prevention of hereditary disease offspring. We talked about this when we talked about the Jews. Basically, anybody who could be considered as genetically diseased or deformed could be sterilized. Now, I said before that the reason why this was a problem is that you had German doctors who were looking at non-Germans and saying whether or not the non-Germans should even be allowed to breed, and we know how that worked out. However, that also meant that because of the aforementioned laws where there were no other political parties, and the Nazis were the only ones even in control of Germany, that meant that you also had Nazis, National Socialists, who were in charge of, even if you were German, but you happened to be a communist, determining whether the communists were allowed to breed or not. See, that was the wonderful thing about this. The terrifically broad net meant that they were free to sterilize basically anybody. And since you had no rights, there was nothing you could do about it. And so many Jews were thrown in here, even though they had nothing wrong with them. Many blacks were thrown in here. Many Africans were thrown in here. Many Asians were thrown in here, and all the communists basically were thrown in here, whether they were German or not. That's what it was for. However, what about those who they didn't want to wait a generation for? Well, remember I talked about the Treachery Act. Here's where we're going to get to point number 1. The enabling law, which we briefly mentioned earlier. This came after the Reichstag decree. This gave Hitler the power to rule by decree and let him do basically everything else. However, what I want to talk about next is this. The Night of Long Knives. Now, the Night of Long Knives was essentially the purification of the Nazi Party. There are many documentaries that you can go into that will talk about this in much greater detail than I'm going to go into. But what happened was, after the Treachery Act was put in place, they had begun to weed out many people who were not as loyal to the Nazi Party as they could have been. The problem was that once they started doing that, they realized that the actual problem of the Nazis not being Nazi enough went a lot further than they expected. Not only were there a lot more people who weren't as devoted to the cause as they thought they should be, but there were even higher up officers who were outright opposed to it. And so they were left with a choice. How do we deal with this? The answer, of course, was swiftly, where they went through and either arrested or straight up murdered anybody who was found to be disloyal to the party. To any degree. Any degree. Even the slightest. There was no court. Okay, there was no defense against this. people were simply removed. If they were arrested, they went to prison, maybe they were tried, usually they were just summarily charged, and then sentenced. Many were simply taken to another place and executed. Some were executed on site. And so, by doing so, any communist elements that might have managed to infiltrate the NSDAP, yeah, they were gone. So after this, there were a lot of other things that were done that were very similar. Communist marriages were dissolved. They were not allowed to do anything because, as I pointed out, if they can do it for one group, they can do it for all the groups. Basically, anything that they wanted to do to a communist, they could do, up to and including just straight up murdering them. And it wasn't even a matter of whether or not you had the wrong blood in you. You were unfortunately in the way. Okay, you were an enemy of the state. You had the wrong beliefs. And that's about all I have to say about the communists. So let's go ahead and make some parallels here. The reason I want to talk about this is because when we talk about the Jews and all the other racial minorities in Germany, that one's kind of obvious. We have seen genocides that go back long time in human history. Okay? Genocide is one of the oldest things we've been doing, and we're really, really good at it. Because all you gotta do is say, that person over there looks different than me. Let's get rid of him. With the communists, though, it was a little bit harder. Because the communists do look like you. You had to weed them out. You had to find them. But once you found them, you got rid of them. You took away all their rights. You took away all their abilities to sustain themselves. You took away their children. You took away their ability to breed. You took away their entire way of life. And then eventually, you just took them out. The reason why I want to talk to this is because I'm going to go back to the very first thing that I talked about earlier, when I talked about Trump. And I want to talk about that ruling, when they dissolved his businesses. I already talked about how all of his other accusations, implications, everything has been unprecedented. They have gone after the president. They have denied him his rights. They have gone after people who were only guilty by association. They've done a lot of bad things already. However, this is new and also similarly unprecedented. I stated before that the evidence that they have been using to dissolve his business was blatantly fabricated. To say that his home property at Mar-a-Lago is valued at only a few $1,000,000 when the buildings on it alone are valued at more than that, and the business that is there produces more than $25 million annually in revenue, says that it's patently wrong. And the reason why that it was a summary judgment is because if there had been a trial, if they had needed to present evidence, that would have been proven beyond any kind of doubt, not even a shadow. So they could not allow that. They didn't want to allow that. In fact, what they wanted was to just hurt Trump. And so, by summary judgment, they simply stripped him of his business licenses. They said that all of his assets must dissolve within, I think they said like 10 business days. So, 2 weeks. And all of his assets will be seized by the government. All of it without charge, all of it without trial, all of it without evidence, all of it without advocacy, all of it without even being able to confront his accuser. This is not unlike what we saw with the Jews. This is not unlike what we saw with the communists, where they simply take. They say that your rights do not matter, and We're going to do to you what we want to do with you. That's it. I point this out because we are doing the same thing now that the Germans did then. When we talk about things like the Hitler Youth Program, where they took all children and said, you are not allowed to raise your own children, we will raise them for you. It really has shades of what the US education system, and for that matter, the Canadian education system, the British education system, French, Spanish, Portuguese, German, all of them have become. Where the state mandates that you must send your children to their schools. And at least here in the US, these schools have taken the stance where parents are not allowed to actually know what is going on in the schools. This was one of the big revelations during COVID, is when everybody was being homeschooled, and many parents who had been previously ignorant to what was going on in the schools were suddenly educated as to what their children were actually learning. And when the parents pushed back on the schools came back and said that the parents were not allowed to know. They put forth rules that said even homeschooled students must be secured in their own learning space, and they must be alone. No parents, no observers, no nothing. Until, of course, COVID passed, and the children went back to school. But even then, parents didn't give up. Parents filed lawsuits and said that we want to see the curriculum. The schools told them no. Parents got very angry at PTA meetings and school board meetings. The schools had them arrested. You're not allowed to know what's going on in your schools. The reason being, they know for a fact that what they're teaching in the schools, the parents will not like. Now, are they going after groups to sterilize them? No, not really yet. However, when we look at things like the Treachery Act, we can see that within the political parties, it is becoming more and more common to start purity testing. We see groups like the Democrats in particular, but also on the right as well, where people are testing each other and seeing, are you liberal enough? Are you conservative enough to be part of us? The result of this being that we're only going to get more extreme parties out of this as we head further and further toward a Weimar Germany kind of divide. We are seeing many of these same things. The only thing that we haven't really seen yet, of course, is the Night of Long Knives. Not yet, at least. We've already seen rights violated. We've already seen people being barred from their different jobs just because of who they are or what they're doing. So when do we get to this part? I don't know. I have no idea. However, we have had that discussion. I did a simple Google search here, and I pulled up this article from The Citizen. This is from a while ago. This is from back in 2021. This was during COVID times, but this was also shortly after the election. So this is shortly after Biden was elected. This is January 31st, so this is also short. It's 20 days after the J6 riot. And it says, should conservatives be sentenced to a leftist-enforced re-education camp? Now, I'm not going to read the whole article because it's rather long, but if I can pull out a couple of excerpts. We are living in a time where one side accuses the other of lying while giving themselves a pass to lie constantly, since their cause, the progressive cause, is morally superior and immune from criticism. This is true. Most of the media and Democrat politicians spent 3 years lying about Russian collusion, which was ultimately an effort to get a duly elected president impeached and removed from office. This was also true. It was proven. So why was lying out of Russian collusion, lying about having incontrovertible evidence being deemed perfectly okay and even admirable, but when Trump and his supporters lied about election rigging, that it was an existential and treasonous threat to the nation? This has been a question that has not been answered. And so you had people that were talking about how we need to gather up conservatives and send them to camps. It says, in fact, there are many voices on the left now crying for banning conservative groups and Fox News entirely for sending Trump voters, all of them, to re-education camps. I heard a commentator on CNN that 400,000 deaths from COVID are not only Trump's fault, but the fault of all of those who voted for them, and that we should all pay the price. That is to say, that since it would not be murder, since it's not direct, it would just be manslaughter, but all 75 million of the people who voted for Trump, and by the way, the quote-unquote secret ballot that the United States runs, keep in mind that your name is on that ballot. Technically speaking, a number is on that ballot, but that number is tied to your name in the voter register. Your secret ballot is not actually secret. But as the commentator on CNN said, all 75 million Trump supporters and Trump himself should be held up on 400,000 counts of manslaughter. This is a discussion that has been had. And if these people have the power to do it, they would. It's either that or they're hypocrites and liars. Either way, it's not a good outlook for them. And then, I want to go back to Dilbert. Everybody know Dilbert? The comic strip? Specifically the creator. This is also from back in 2020. This is before the election. But after he got in trouble for saying that, blacks and whites should get away from each other, he also said this. He says, Republicans will be hunted if Biden wins the election. He said that within a year, the Biden administration would go through and eradicate all of the all the Republicans, all the conservatives. Now, obviously, that did not happen, and a lot of people looked at that and said that that's completely unhinged. But is it? No, it did not happen this time. But a lot of people like to use the Skittle example. They say you're given a bowl of Skittles. And they say, all of these Skittles, except for one, are normal Skittles. One of them, however, is laced with poison. The poison has no counter agent. It is 100% lethal, and it will be lethal faster than you can get any kind of medical attention. Okay? You will be dead in less than 5 minutes. Are you eating a Skittle? Just one. A lot of people might say yes, because a lot of people might play the odds and say it's a whole bowl of them. What are the odds I'm going to get the one? A lot of people, however, will say, you know what? A very slight percentage chance, even if it's like a 1% chance, or a 0.1% chance, that I'm going to just immediately die, I'm not taking the risk. So Scott Adams here was wrong, obviously. We're still here. I'm still here. I mean, I'm not a Republican, but I am conservative. But the fact that the odds were there at all, that people believe the odds are there, is significant. We are not yet at the night of long knives. However, the generally assumed opinion is that it is not a 0% chance. If you are on the left, you believe firmly that conservatives want to arrest you for what you're doing. Maybe it's because you're pro-abortion and you think that they're going to arrest you for being pro-abortion. Maybe it's because you're pro-transition for kids and you think they're going to arrest you for this. Maybe you think they're just going to come to your state and take over, a fascist government takeover. Anyway, if you're on the left, you believe that these are non-zero probabilities. That doesn't mean they have to be high. It just means that they're above zero. They could happen. We're not even in the realm of quantum mechanics and probability here. We're in general statistics. And if you happen to be on the right, you believe that should the left get into absolute power, that they would round up conservatives and put them into camps for re-education, or they would make churches and church groups illegal, that they would strip the irresponsible and dangerous Republican Party of all of its political power. If you're on the right, you believe that these are non-zero probabilities. And for my point, I'm kind of in the middle here. I'm an independent person. I lean more conservative, but I am firmly independent. And I look at both sides of this and I say, you're both right. There are non-zero probabilities that both of these things could happen. Which is why we come back to the Weimar Germany example. We are a divided civilization. And this divided civilization is heading for this. The fact is that everything in Germany kicked off with the Reichstag fire. And we saw what the Nazis did to the communists. We saw what the Nazis did to the Jews. Now, I doubt that the Jews, had they, major power in Germany, would have done the same. The Jews seem pretty cool. They're pretty chill. However, the communists, specifically the Marxist communists, because they were Marxists, the same as the communists who took over the Soviet Union, the same as the communists who took over China. If the Marxist communists had taken over Germany instead of the National Socialist Party, what would have been the outcome of that? Would it have necessarily been any different? Or would the Marxists have decided that they needed to do what every other Marxist group has done in history, and that is purge all of their political opposition? They did it in the Soviet Union. They did it in China. That's how we got Taiwan. Taiwan happened because after the communists took over in China, they decided they were going to arrest and execute the entire Chinese government. The Chinese government fled to Taiwan. And they've been there ever since. So had the communists taken over, it's very likely, in fact, I would say almost guaranteed, that sooner or later they would have done to the Nazis what the Nazis inevitably did to them. And so when we look at our own positions here, when we look at the Democrats versus the Republicans, the conservatives versus the liberals, or the conservatives versus labor, or whatever it happens to be, or the various different parties that are in Germany right now, ironically enough, where Germany is actually trying to purge their own upstart populist conservative party. They're trying to dissolve their own populist party, and they're trying to criminally punish the members of it. Where Germany itself is doing the same thing. The question now is, how do we stop it? We don't want this. I mean, we really don't want to go down this road. Keep in mind that everybody, when they talk about the Holocaust, talks about the 12 million people that died, and they talk about the Jewish extermination, but keep in mind that the Jews only made up 6 of the 12 million exterminated. The next biggest majority was their political opponents. And then after that, you had all of your other various minorities. You had Africans, Asians, Hispanics, Arabs, you had the disabled, you had the elderly. But first it was the Jews, then it was the communists. We still have time to stop this. And that means first, recognizing the problem. You have to recognize the steps that were taken to get from here to here, and then eventually to the Holocaust. And when you look at here, what was the first step taken? The suspension of rights, the suspension of citizenship. Because if people still had their rights, you could not just dissolve an entire political party or all the political parties. You could not just take people's property and their businesses. You could not take their children from them and re-educate them. And you sure as hell could not take them, try them in either secret courts or just skip the courts in general, and then sentence them to prison, labor, or death. The rights of the individual is where all of this stems from. It's where your problems stem from. It's where my problems stem from. It's where his problems stem from. As I said before when we started this, and as he iterated when he was president, or at least running for president, they're going for him because he's in the way of getting to you. But after they can get rid of him, you're next. They're already going after his lawyers. They're already going after other major influencers. The Russell Brand incident that I talked about just last week, where some anonymous accusations have had him stripped of every single asset and business that he's a part of. The only thing he has left is Rumble. And even the British government is trying to get him removed from that and threatening to remove Rumble, or at least ban it, from the entire United Kingdom. All because they support one person. They're actually appealing to the Canadian government to potentially shut down Rumble as an entirety, because Rumble supports one person. We do live in a new age. This is a digital age. It is an information age, where the attacks are going to come from more subdued and more discreet angles. They don't have to kill you if they can just let you die. This is cancel culture taking the next step. Deny people all their rights, deny people all their resources, and the rest attends to itself. And so we have to make sure that your rights are protected. That is how we stop this. And we do it by stopping every person who wants to take your rights. Now, how do we do that? We do that in every legal means possible. And I have to say this both for pragmatic terms and for YouTube's terms. That is to say that we participate in the system as much as we possibly can. But the system is breaking down. And when it breaks down, sooner or later, it's probably not going to be us. But somebody is going to fire the first shot. And after that, we're right back where we were 80 years ago. We are about to take one giant leap backwards if we don't stop it now. Can it be stopped? I don't know. I know that's how you do it. But whether or not we can actually get away with it, that is the question. However, before you can do anything about that, you first have to know what's even going on, because you can't solve a problem you don't know about. So I hope that today I have educated you on what the problem is, and the rest is in your hands. I'll help out as much as I can. But that's going to do it today. I'm going to go ahead and take a break now. I got some other stuff to do, but this was a good discussion. It felt good to get this off my chest. I hope you got something out of it too. And if you want to get more stuff like this, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon. That way you get notified. because that's good. If you want to hear more of this, hit the button. But more importantly, as I stated before in the lecture, and I will state it again now, share this video. Because I said the word Nazi a lot, and YouTube does not like that word. So unless you share it, no one's going to see it. The same thing goes for liking and commenting. These things kick this video up in the algorithm, which is going to be burying me. Like, I'm generally concerned that if I ever actually get up to 500 subscribers and I'm eligible to monetize, that these lectures are probably going to keep me from getting monetized. Either way, though, I'm not about to bend the knee just because I need the money. And I do need the money. But I'm not going to stop doing this because this is too important. So, share the video with anybody you can think of. Leave a like on it to help me in the algorithm. Leave comments on it to help me in the algorithm. Help this message get out. And that aside, I will not have a lecture for the next 2 weeks, I think. The reason being, I have family plans next Saturday, and I have other obligations the Saturday after that. So there's going to be 2 weeks off from the lectures. However, tomorrow we go back to our tabletop stream, where we're going to be working more on the Adeptus Astartes from Warhammer. So that's fun. And the Sunday stream will continue every other day because nothing so far gets in the way of that. So I look forward to seeing many of you here tomorrow for that. It's going to be fun. And for the rest of you, I will see you for the next lecture whenever I get around to it. And until then, take care.